folks, Ariel over here. Today I am making something using up some of our remaining apples. We turned a lot of apples into applesauce and so on, as you saw, or I actually have applesauce too, into apple cider, but we kept some to eat fresh, and they're now at the point of getting a little bit pithy. They're not that pleasant. There's nothing wrong with them, but the texture is a little over the hill and not that pleasant for eating fresh. So I made one of these the other day. We had some friends over. It disappeared almost instantly, and so I'm making another one because this is a pretty good way to use up apples. This is some kind of a French tart, apparently. The key thing here is you need some kind of skillet or pan that you can put in the oven. I tend to have all the pot racks right above my head here out of the camera, but I have stainless steel pans, so those could go in the oven. I have cast iron ones. This one's actually carbon steel, which works much like cooking with cast iron, but it's slightly lighter. It's still pretty weighty, but it's not quite as heavy. I'm just choosing to use this pan because that works pretty well. I'm not quite following the original recipe I found. I'm going to use honey instead of sugar in here, but basically you're making a honey butter or sugar butter, little caramelized bit in the bottom of the pan. I'm going to stack my apples in really pretty, and then we're going to make a puff pastry with just flour, butter, and salt that goes on top of it. The whole thing will then go in the oven and bake, and then when you're done, you'll pull this out and flip it out. My latestly acquired thrift store pan, because I did not have any plates big enough to do this and flip it onto. So then the pastry becomes on the bottom and the apples are on top, and it looks really pretty. So I'm going to put it together and maybe it'll inspire you. I think it would be good with other fruits as well, but this seemed like a particularly good way to use up apples that were slightly mealy. That mealy texture just completely, I don't know, goes away in the cooking. Nobody could tell that they were a little over the hill once this was baked. So we really enjoyed it. I think you guys might too. So the very first thing I did here is actually put the apples aside, and the recipe I looked at said to grate your butter with like a cheese grater and then put it in the freezer, which would probably work as well. That seems to me more time consuming and inconvenient because I have a pastry blender, which is this little kind of knife-edged tool, which I just find more efficient, but I'm sure you could do it either way. So I'm starting out with 1 3/4 cups of flour. These are half cups, so that's 1.5 cups. Another 1/4. And I'm gonna put a little bit of salt in. 1/2 teaspoon or so, that'll get mixed into the flour. That's Redmond real salt if you're wondering why it looks kind of dirty. And now this butter is refrigerator cold right now, but I'm going to actually cut it into here and then put this whole bowl in the freezer and freeze it very solid, because to get the pastry texture that you're generally looking for with kind of puffy, flaky layers, the butter has to be in very cold little chunks. If you melted this butter, for instance, and then mixed it into the flour, you would not get the same texture at all. So the key to this is having everything be very cold when you go to put the pastry together. But at the moment, my flour is room temperature, my butter is fridge cold, and you can either follow their directions, which are to cheese grater your flour, or sorry, cheese grater your butter, and then freeze it solid in the little crumbs spread out on a baking sheet, and then mix it in. Or, like I said, to me, this just seemed quicker to use the pastry blender to chunk it up in my flour, and then I put the flour, the bowl, the butter, and everything in the freezer until the whole thing was frozen into little chunks, and that just seemed more efficient to me. But I'm sure either method would work, because the key thing you're doing to get the pastry texture is the butter has got to be in small chunks, and it's got to be very, very cold when you actually put this together. If you're gonna get a pastry blender to do stuff like this, it is worth getting a good stout one, because you will be using it to cut cold butter. I had one for years from a thrift store, which can be a place to get good stout ones, but the one I happen to have was not. And if it is not, if the metal is not stronger than very cold butter, you will bend your pastry blender and not cut butter. This one is a very nice, stiff stainless steel kind of dull knife blade cutter there, and it works excellently. And like I said, I just find this to be faster than running all the butter through a grater. And if I didn't mention it, that was 2 sticks of butter. That's 1 cup of cold butter. And I'm doing this just kind of going back and forth till all the butter looks like it is small flakes mixed into the flour, no large chunks left. But I definitely don't want this to get so warm that it's all stuck together and mushy, because, as I said, that will give you a very different product result in making a pastry. This is true for pie crusts or other similar things. This one came out really good the first time I tried it, and I think we will make this with probably a lot of different fruit over time. That's pretty good, and I'm just going to put this whole bowl into the freezer. So now that my butter and flour are freezing, I am doing my caramel in the bottom of the pan. The recipe calls for sugar. I did do that the first time to see how it came out and decided I would be perfectly fine with the texture of honey. And it calls for about 1.5 cups, which I did, and I actually thought, despite how much I like sweet things, that was a little excessively sweet. Our apples are pretty sweet. I just didn't like it quite that sweet for this part of it. So I am doing honey because we have lots of our own honey. And I'm doing less than 1.5 cups. Honey is sweeter than sugar, and I wanted it a little less sweet. So I'm not even measuring, but I would guess that this is a little less than 1 cup of honey is more like what I'm doing. And this is going to melt into the bottom of the pan here on the stove in a minute. And we're going to add some butter, and then we will slice all of our pretty apples on top of that. Once again, I'm not exactly following what the recipe said. They say to heat the sugar till it melts and starts to caramelize, and then slowly add your butter, where honey is more liquid anyway than dry sugar. I am just choosing to melt the two together here from the start. So what I'm doing is a little less than 1 cup of honey. You could do more or less sweet according to your taste, and a stick of butter, which is 1/2 cup of butter. This will be the underside as the apples cook, and then the top side, once again, once we are done, and flip it over. So I just want this to get nice and melty, and that'll just take a second. As you can see, our honey butter mixture here is just about finished melting. And the honey will give this a slightly different texture than the sugar, but it is the sweetener that we have plenty of because it's what we can raise here. And so I do try to use it for a lot of things. But I will link below to the original recipe that inspired this, and you can certainly follow their actual instructions. Now you do want to keep the heat on fairly low, because when you are heating something, be it sugar or honey, a sweetener like this, you can burn it fairly quickly, so you don't want this on high. This is, if you get into candy making, exact temperatures here make a big difference on if you get a rock hard candy or a soft chewy candy or something like that. Sugar does very interesting things with heat. I'm not going for any particular temperature, I'm just letting it caramelize here a little bit and kind of keeping it stirred as I do that. Okay, I've just let this simmer for a few minutes here slowly. You can kind of see the bubbly, frothy texture it has reached. And on the end of my spatula, it's not just running off like water anymore. It's a little bit thicker, and as it cools, it'll get even thicker. So that's about what I want. So we're going to take this off the burner and fill it with all of our apples. Okay, this has kind of quit bubbling, though it's still plenty hot, so you want to be careful touching that pan. And I am just going to slice up my apples. Here's another way where I diverged from the original recipe. They said to use the whole halves and quarters and try to pack them as tightly as possible. It seemed to me that I could get more apples in and pack them better You can kind of see when I'm coring these what I mean about they're a bit of a soft, mealy texture now, which, again, there's nothing wrong with. They're just not pleasant and crunchy to eat fresh. Anyway, I thought I could get more apples in, and I still have a bunch to use up, and make the whole tart a little bit more solid by slicing them. So what I did was made kind of thick slices. These aren't huge apples, but that's what, 3/4 to an inch thick. And then it did seem to be worth taking the time to arrange them really neatly and snugly. So I'm going to go around the pan here until I have it all filled up with apple slices. And then we are going to pull our very frozen butter and flour out of the freezer and plop our pastry on top, and in the oven it goes. So it actually takes me longer to explain what I'm doing here than it does to do this. This does not take very long to throw together, which is kind of nice. So I just packed as many apples as I could in here, tried to arrange them nicely, but I did several layers of wedges in between wedges to use up quite a few apples. Okay, just pulled this bowl out of the freezer. You can probably see it condensing water. The bowl is cold, the flour is cold, and the butter is cold. Now, the only other thing we add to this is cold water. As icy cold as you can get it without being frozen. We're going to go for about 1/2 cup, but really what we're going for is a texture. So I'm going to drizzle some of this in slowly. We want this to just barely start to stick the dry flour together. Again, too much water and it will get mushy and not the texture you're looking for. And so that's something you want to just add a little bit at a time. And you know, you can put this water in the freezer probably at the same time as you put the butter in to make it really cold. We have really ice cold water that comes out of our spring here naturally, so I didn't worry about that, but you may have warmer water depending where you live. So I want these chunks to just have a little teeny bit of flour left that isn't quite sticking together. But this is really close. A little bit that's powdery in that corner yet. And now we're going to roll this into a round circle and plop it on top of our apples. This is a beautiful day for doing this kind of thing because outside it is drizzling rain and occasionally trying to spit snowflakes. It's pretty cold, not much above freezing. So you can get this to just adhere into a barely holding together ball. Need a little extra flour on your countertop to keep this from sticking here as we start to roll it. And as you can see, this is barely staying intact, and that is actually the texture that we want. So, just going to start to roll this. And I find because it's so barely holding together, I kind of gotta reshape the edges just a little because we're going for a round shape. Just very gently rolling this out to be about the same size as the top of my skillet that the apples are in. And just patch up my little edges here where it tries to flake apart. I'm going to measure, is it big enough? By doing that, looks like it is. So we are going to carefully pick this up and plop it on top, hopefully without having it come apart into too many pieces. There we go. Now I'm going around and just tucking the edges kind of down around the apples there. And the whole thing is going in the oven to bake. So this is why it's important that you're using some kind of pan where the handle and all can go in the oven. And I'm putting this in here at 375. I did find it was worthwhile to have a pan underneath because it did bubble over just a little bit in spots. So it's going to be there for about an hour until the pastry looks all beautiful golden brown on top. About 20 minutes, you can see the pastry puffing and sizzling. About 45 minutes, you can see the start of it getting golden brown and bubbling over there a little bit. Glad I put the catch pan under it. So now that I've pulled this out and let it cool for a couple minutes, it's still fairly hot, we are going to turn it upside down by getting whatever size of something you have that will go over your pan. And as quickly as possible, doing a flip. I have 1 or 2 apples that stuck into my pan, so we'll put them back. That's hot. Where they go there. And now we just let the whole thing cool enough to slice it up and eat it. Once again, this came out beautifully. The crust was flaky and light, and the apples were warm and rich and sweet, and I think I will probably be making a few more of these over the next little bit of time as we continue to finish up the fresh apples that we had for the year. So give it a try and let me know what you think. And I will link the original recipe down below. But like I always like to point out, one of the fun things about making your own food is you can make it exactly the way you want it and not follow anybody else's recipe. So try it out.
Thank you everyone for watching. It means a lot, and I hope you learned something along the way.
If you know somebody else who would enjoy this as well, share it with them.